Welcome to another fine episode of Pixel Talk, the show where we discuss what it means to be human from a pixel's point of view. And now, here is your host, Fivezy.
Too late!
Final question.
Very well.
One of us tells only lies.
The other tells only truths.
By asking us only one question.
You must decide which is the real magic word.
Anyone?
Only one. Question will be, if you were your brother, which one would you say is the magic word? Which one are you asking? It doesn't matter. That's easy. It's him.
Of course, it's me.
Then I choose you.
He knows.
What makes you choose me? I told you it was him.
Yes, me.
If you were the truth-telling one, then what you said will be a lie, because you will answer truthfully what your lying brother will say. Therefore, I can safely say that the answer will be the opposite of what you say. On the other hand, if you are the lying worm, then you will tell me what your truth-telling brother will say, but it will be a lie. Therefore, the answer will also be the opposite of what you say. Understand? Of course.
When an outsider first of all discovers that magicians are supposed to keep silent about their practice, especially if they're into conspiracy theories, their minds go to all kinds of unhelpful places. The first expectation is to think, well, it's because magicians want all the power to themselves, and if they talked about how they performed the magic, then they wouldn't be able to keep that power to themselves, and then they wouldn't be able to control the world, and so on and so forth. The reasons why we keep silence are much more practical. This is a passage from Eliphas Levi's Transcendental Magic, and it goes like this: to attain the sanctum regnum, in other words, the knowledge and power of the Magi, there are four indispensable conditions: an intelligence illuminated by study, an intrepidity which nothing can check, a will which cannot be broken, and a prudence which nothing can corrupt and nothing intoxicate. To know, to dare, to will, to keep silence. Such are the four words of the Magus inscribed upon the four symbolical forms of the Sphinx. Now, the first reason, traditionally, why somebody practicing magic would want to keep silence would be to protect themselves. Physically, literally, their lives. Historically, there's always been a war between orthodoxy and heresy. Orthodoxy being much more interested in what well-known authorities have to say on a particular matter, and heresy being much more interested in the direct experience of the matter itself. Now, orthodoxy tends to attract people who are more fearful in nature, simply. It's not a bad thing. They're very lucky to have orthodoxy on their side. However, that can result in them feeling simply afraid of people who are much more interested in a direct experience of any particular topic, and particularly in matters which are difficult to prove in tangible ways, they tend to get quite violent, and historically they have in fact become so violent that people practicing heretical ways have literally had their lives endangered. So keeping silent was just a matter of staying alive. Next, there's a matter of keeping the information alive. As you know, Samuel McGregor Mathers and the other founders of the Golden Dawn went through quite a lot of trouble to find the information that had been gleaned throughout the years, throughout the ages, and had managed to survive until the modern time thanks to a coded method of keeping the information. So people who didn't know what the code was, people who didn't know what the signs were supposed to represent, and so on and so forth, would not necessarily know that what they were looking at was a repository of ancient knowledge. Thanks to this encoded way of keeping information, this ancient knowledge which dates back to the Sumerians is still available to us today, despite the Inquisition and many other times in history when magical knowledge was suppressed. Most of this information is now out in the open, which is why I don't feel so bad revealing this stuff to you guys. I don't feel like it's so much revealing as much as pointing you in the right direction. But you can see that the second sign that the Golden Dawn taught was the sign of silence, also known as the sign of Harpocrates. Harpocrates was the Egyptian god of silence, which you can see represented here on the card of the Aeon from Crowley's Thoth Tarot deck, with his finger up to his mouth, in a sign that is supposed to represent childishness, but also an entreaty to silence. In the graphic novel Promethea, Alan Moore shows the Aeon card with Harpo marks, Harpocrates, Harpo marks. I believe Robert Anton Wilson also pointed out a similar relation between the silent Mark's brother and the Egyptian trickster god of magic. It comes with a very lovely poem, a very interesting one that gives us an idea why Harpocrates is considered to be the god of the new Aeon. Ideas mankind will need, one fears, sometime in the next 20 years. 'Tis then the card 20 comes in play, the Aeon, once called Judgment Day. Apocalypse, as world's end scene, need only revelation mean a world of ideas set alight by information fierce and bright. Man's knowledge doubles, it appears, just less than every couple of years. Man's last 2 years more breakthroughs see than all our previous history. It's said, by 2017, this doubling's each half second seen. Here information's flashpoint looms, its blaze reveals as it consumes. Men judge themselves in this new light. One worldview's crashed, the next takes flight. One aeon's burned by this knowledge flash, new consciousness born from its ash. Says Crowley, when not telling jokes. And knowledge secret is simply because in order to experience the information as real, the initiate has to build up to it. If somebody is given the outcome, experience of an initiation, then that is just information. Information is not the same thing as experience. And if somebody already knows what to expect by the end of their initiation, then that initiation is meaningless. They'll get to the end, and instead of having the experience firsthand, they'll just be expecting what they already know to expect. And what they'll get is very much what somebody gets when they go to see the Eiffel Tower, for example, or the Mona Lisa. They already know what it is, they already know what to expect, and when they get there, they're not living in the moment. They're seeing, oh yes, this is what I've been told about. But if somebody had never seen the Eiffel Tower or ever seen the Mona Lisa, then having the immediate experience of that reality will have a very different effect. Well, nowadays the information is, as I was saying, out in the public, and secret societies aren't as abundant as they were at the turn of the 20th century. And while they do exist, most magicians nowadays really practice alone, and this can be seen by the proliferation of self-initiation books which exist out there. So why would a modern-day magician want to keep silence? There are a few reasons. First of all, and I think to me personally, maybe most significantly, is to do with the quantum effects of expectation. I made a video a little over a year ago called Quantum Magick, and if you haven't watched it, I do really suggest you go and check that out. I will leave a link in the description down below to make it easier for you to find. But the general idea is that the future is made of chaos, as is the past. The further you look into the future, the less certain it is. The further you look into the past, the less fixed it is. The only moment that is absolutely fixed is the very present moment. Magic, to me, is a little bit like looking into the future and picking the outcome that you specifically want, making it real in your mind, and giving that particular outcome a better chance of being the one that comes into reality than any other option. Now, we do that with many different methods. Each magician has got his or her own favorite method, but the majority of magicians do use visualization, imagining a desired outcome. Now, the minute you tell somebody else about your desired outcome, or that you're doing anything in particular to make a desired outcome happen, then they start having expectations. They start thinking what can go right and what can go wrong. They start having their own idea of what your future is going to actually look like. And suddenly, the future that you had fashioned for yourself has to compete with someone else's idea of what your future is probably going to look like. So that's one reason. Another reason would come in if you're working with particular spirits. Now, some spirits really like recognition, and if you have a look on Facebook on some of the esoteric and occult groups, you'll see that they're awash with people saying, hey, I worked with such and such a spirit today, I just want to say thank you. And that's simply because that spirit is known to appreciate fame. And the person working will have promised that spirit to mention that name in public in exchange for that spirit's help. But other spirits don't really like notoriety. It seems to be the case mainly with aerial spirits like angels. This isn't common to all angels, of course, but a lot of them seem to like to keep a certain amount of privacy and a certain amount of agency over whom they work with. Another reason why you might want to keep silent is to avoid decorating your ego with spirituality. This is one of the big pitfalls in magic. A lot of high magic is done specifically to suppress the ego and to allow our higher selves to take over. I mean, there's no question that our lower selves does have to remind our higher self from time to time that it has to eat, but nevertheless, the general consensus is that our higher self is better equipped to know what is ultimately best for us. Now, when we start telling everyone else how wonderful we are as a magician and, hey, this is the practice that I'm currently doing, then we do run the risk of approval seeking. Now, most of the time it doesn't happen. We think that people are going to be amazed, but actually most of the time people are just freaked out. But I suppose it does happen a lot on esoteric Facebook groups. I'm sure if you have a look down in the comments a few months after this has been published, then you'll have plenty of comments with people virtue signaling. I believe Damien Eccles very recently made a video about precisely virtue signaling, which I'll also link in the description. And while we're on the topic of ego, let me also address another thing, and that is
So Levistus himself is very interesting within the course of the Devils of the Nine Hells because he is in a lot of ways the most different out of all of them. See, within the Devil Lords, we have the monsters, we have the fallen angels, we have the straight up normal looking devils, we have the nasty looking hybrids, we even have a hag, a Devil Lord. But what we don't have is the Grasp of Hell. A charismatic, perhaps funny, approachable, maybe a more normal feeling devil. Now, don't get me wrong, neither Grasp nor Levistus are normal, but charisma is certainly something that many of these Devil Lords just seem to miss. Yet for all of his charisma, he is the most hated out of all of the Devil Lords. Devils are known to conspire against one another, to betray each other when possible, but to do this, sometimes strong relationships are forged, alliances are made. Every Devil Lord has an alliance with someone else. They have to survive, because it is just a matter of time until you get backstabbed. Levistus is the only Lord who doesn't, and that's curious. Originally, he was extremely close to Asmodeus, so much so that he helped Asmodeus succeed in his rise to power, and was then granted dominion over Stygia, which was at the time a great boon, considering that Stygia is one of the two hells that get access to the river Styx, a fairly beneficial dominion to own. Considering that the other hell is Avernus and you don't really want to be there, hey look, Stygia is really nice. Now Levistus was known once as a handsome, roguish devil who could sweet-talk his way out of trouble, extremely smart and cunning as well, but now he lays imprisoned in a cage of ice for the rest of time, with all of hell against him. If it wasn't for the fact that he is completely impervious to damage while in this prison, he would have been murdered a long time ago. What exactly happened? When you look at Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, which is the only 5th edition book that talks about Levistus, all they say is, quote, Stygia is a frozen wasteland of mysterious origin, a churning murky sea covered in a thick layer of ice. Where the ice gives way to open water, immense icebergs drift on the unpredictable currents. Levistus is trapped within one of these bergs, imprisoned there by Asmodeus, for reasons that few can even guess about, end quote. They straight up don't tell you why he was punished. It's interesting because on this very same book, they go further to elaborate on almost every single Devil Lord, but they also just conveniently leave out Levistus. There is no stat block for him, but there are for others. What the hell happened? Have you ever wondered why there isn't a Queen of Hell? A romantic consort of sorts for Asmodeus. I mean, even Demogorgon, the Prince of Demons, has love interest. We literally talked about it on his video. I mean, and look at him. If he can do it, anyone can do it. And you guys, of course, know of all the gods having children all the time. Lolth, of course, being the ex-wife of Corellon Larethian, the god of elves. Moradin, the god of dwarves, having Bernard True Silver. I mean, this is very common. So why not Asmodeus? Well, he did have a wife, actually. Her name was Bensosia. You might not know it because she appeared in 1st edition a long time ago in an official Dungeons & Dragons magazine. And then, well, things happened. It's interesting that they mentioned Glacia in Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, who is the daughter of Asmodeus and Bensosia, but they don't mention the mother. On a form of routine checkup of sorts with her entourage of several people. Levistus ambushed her, killed her escorts, and then attempted to turn her against her husband Asmodeus. He figured she might know of a weakness or secret that he could exploit. When she refused, he killed her. Nowadays, the concept of openly betraying Asmodeus is pretty foolish, but back then it wasn't. They didn't really know how much power he really had. Now, all they have to do is look at what happened to Levistus to know that rebelling is futile, for his punishment was to remain imprisoned in a block of ice forever. Now, this story appears in Guide to Hell for 1st edition, and in the Book of Vile Darkness for 3rd edition. I believe Frostborn also retells the same story. But now, according to Tyrants of the Nine Hells, Levistus did something else to Bensosia, okay, when she refused. But the gods of monetization shackle me, and so we shall not speak of it. Though all the same, I did ask my contact at Wizards of the Coast, who told me, quote, the Book of Vile Darkness is a better interpretation of his backstory, end quote. So the info on Tyrants of the Nine Hells appears to not be canon for all it's worth. Now, that being said, things get far more complex, as it is told in Dungeon Magazine number 197 for 4th edition, which so far appears to be the actual canon. Quote,
The story goes that Levistus approached Bensosia as she traveled through Stygia and offered to make her his queen in exchange for helping him overthrow her master. According to the tale, she was true to Asmodeus and refused the offer. For this defiance, she and all her pit fiends were slain. This story is commonly told throughout the Nine Hells. Different version of events. Bensosia saw in Levistus another chance to weaken Asmodeus, and the two had been allies for many years. She traveled to Stygia when she could and whispered secrets to the Lord of the Fifth to give them any advantage possible. Those who tell this story do not believe that anything close to love existed between these conspirators. Each sought to exploit the other for dark purposes. Despite their duplicity, the two managed to keep their tryst going for some time until Glacia discovered them. End quote. See, Levistus was not just sexing the Queen of Hell, but he had a whole other thing going with the Princess of Hell. He was in fact doing the mother and the daughter. Quote, Levistus, always the dashing scoundrel and rake, stole Glacis' heart during one of his visits to Asmodeus' court. Levistus
is how when these magical practices emerge, interestingly, they emerge in the context of often globalization, urbanization, and multiculturalism. So why do I bring that up? Because these are descriptors that certainly identify the period we're in right now. Urbanization, multiculturalism. And so you look at ancient Rome, they were experiencing many of these same problems. You look at the fall of the Roman Empire, the development of early Christianity. Well, magic really gets going. Magic thrives. These magical traditions, these magical practices thrive in the context in which globalization, urbanization, and multiculturalism occur. And so let me read this quick paragraph. Again, this is from the introduction, and those of you who have joined, if you want to know more about this introduction, I've already posted that video over at the website for website members. But let me just read this quick paragraph. The historical incidence and efflorescence of esoteric ideas at times when the dominant worldview no longer commands general assent is suggestive of their social construction and selection, but it also begs the question of their function. It is notable that esoteric ideas often attend the breakdown of settled religious orthodoxies and socio-economic orders. Maybe something like a Great Reset would do. Hermetic, Neoplatonic, and Gnostic works of literature were produced in the first 3 centuries AD in the Hellenistic arena of the Roman Empire, where globalization, urbanization, and multiculturalism confused older traditions and simpler faiths. Likewise, the European Renaissance was launched in Western cities where dynamism and economic and cultural progress collided with the waning of medieval assumptions in theology and philosophy. This was the period when Hermeticism, alchemy, astrology, magic, and Kabbalah were reformulated from their sources in late antiquity to form a new Philosophia Perennis, embracing Christianity and ancient wisdom traditions. In the late 19th century, when Europe entered a period of sustained urban industrial growth simultaneous with decline of organized religion in the face of challenges of secularism and science on the other, occultism and esoteric societies enjoyed a voyage, entering public discourse on a scale not seen since the 16th century. So very interesting then, very interesting that magical traditions, Western esoteric practices thrive when the dominant society and its ways fall apart. They thrive in sort of this transmutive state, right? When society's moving from one more of a structured state to another, magic thrives. And so when we look at the progressivism, when we can look at BLM, the world that we live in now, we're seeing the old world order, whatever that is. Zionist, central banking capitalism, the faux dialectic with comment, whatever it is, it's falling apart. We're in the midst of what's called the Great Reset. Something's going on here. And throughout history, whether it be the 19th century, whether it be the 4th century, the 3rd century, the same pattern continues. And I would say that we're in the middle of that same pattern right now, where if you were to survey people, I would say the majority of people asked would actually have more of a magical spiritual paradigm than anything related to sort of an Orthodox Christian theology. And so I think that's interesting and certainly worth noting. So also, as I said, this stuff is the source of perennialism itself and the concept of perennialism, that all religions share this one truth. And where does this get going? Well, as I told you, Marsilio Ficino in the 15th century, the 1400s, that he gets this Hermetic material, and the underlying presupposition of all of Europe was the gentleman known as Hermes Trismegistus. The thrice great Hermes was the oldest philosopher in human history. So when Marsilio Ficino, when the Italian Renaissance was underway, when they were translating the Corpus Hermeticum, the majority of the intelligentsia believed that Hermes Trismegistus was older than Moses. Now, for some of you who are a little bit more sophisticated in this stuff, you know that people like Philo of Alexandria, many people debated whether Moses was the progenitor even of the Greek philosophical tradition, that Moses was the oldest known. Century, the most learned people in Europe thought Hermes Trismegistus and this Hermetic tradition was the oldest wisdom of mankind, and therefore this set the ground for this Prisca Theologia, this idea that there is this one truth and all the world religions sprang from it. So that's why we get the 16th century being the most magical century in recorded, or at least in history, since Christ. Why? 15th century, mid-1400s, now we get Marsilio Ficino translating the Hermetic Corpus. That next century then, for 100 years, they believed him to be the oldest wisdom figure in human history. Now, again, once that's redated, it totally jumbles everybody's perception of history and knowledge and so forth. So that's, again, important. Now, when that moves forward into the more modernist period, when the West encounters Oriental or Eastern mysticism, this presupposition of perennialism, it grows further. Why? Because these traditions of magic have so much in common with these forms of Eastern mysticism. Therefore, if you believe in this Prisca Theologia, if you believe in this Philosophia Perennis, well, that must mean, again, further perpetuate this idea that there's just one single truth and all these religions must be emerging from it. Now, we as Orthodox Christians, we would say, well, the reason why there's so many similarities here is because this is the continual sort of lie of the evil one, right? This idea of self-illuminism, this idea of secret knowledge, this idea of essentially self-worship, which a lot of these illuministic spiritual frameworks have. that is very different from Christianity. That is certainly very different from Orthodoxy. We certainly would not be putting that forth as the case. So that's why you look at these Hinduism, you look at the yogic practices, you look at tantric practices in East Asia. Wow, they do kind of have a lot of similarity with these magical traditions. But that doesn't mean that just because a multiplicity of traditions share a multiplicity of characteristics doesn't make it true, right? It's sort of a logical fallacy there, but this was the presupposition. And so this is a big difference too, this esotericism, than from an Orthodox Christian perspective, or really it should be any Christian perspective. You certainly should not be a Freemason or belong to any secret society and then identify as Christian or go to church. I mean, it's a fundamental contradiction. I mean, if you're a Freemason, again, you don't believe in the Holy Trinity, it's some symbolic thing, but that's neither here nor there. But all the practices we're going to look at today are all about secret gnosis, that you keep secrets. Secrets are really important. Why are secrets important? Because secrets mean that I have things that you don't have. That makes me more in the know. That makes me more knowledgeable. That makes me more illuminated. That's what's called illuministic spirituality. We as Christians are called to speak truth as truthfully as we can, exoterically, to the world. No secrets, no holding back. We're trying to give it all to you right there, right now, speaking exoteric truth. So, at least from an Orthodox Christian perspective, we're not supposed to be holding secrets, because secrecy insinuates some sort of obfuscation, some sort of darkness, some sort of seclusion, right? And so we know, again, who's in charge of all that stuff? Who's in charge of the secrecy? Well, this isn't Christ. Christ is the light. He exposes the secrecy. And so from an Orthodox perspective, we can look at this perennialistic presupposition and say, well, again, that's the same trick of the evil one, And so one of the things that I want to share with you guys, again, before diving into this text, is right here. So these six characteristics of what are called esoteric traditions. Now, the first, let me fix something real quick. The first four are what are called, this gentleman, the scholar who founded the field of Western esoteric traditions, this French gentleman, Dr. Fivezy, he says the first four are what he considered intrinsic. Every single magical or esoteric tradition has these four things. And then the secondary, the last two, number 5 and 6, they are more variable. They're more variable amongst the various traditions. I can't see it. I think it might be a little bit hard here. I'll put it down in front of me. Maybe you guys can read it better there. So the first characteristic of these Western esoteric traditions is this, what he calls the law of correspondences. And you guys are really familiar with this. This isn't anything crazy. It's the idea of as above, so below. The same sort of hermetic adage, right? That there's a sort of practicality to nature. Now, they wouldn't, again, back in those days, they wouldn't call it fractals. They would consider it a sort of emergent patterns back to the one, the transcendent one. It takes, again, much more of a Neoplatonic framework. And so correspondences is essential because that's how the magic works. That's how the magic works. It works by you matching up the colors and the letters and the days of the week and the time and the fragrances and all this stuff together. These correspond together, and that's what makes your magic more efficacious. And this is how you can line up this lower world with the above world and therefore have more celestial power, per se. Now, this isn't totally out of bounds in regards to how we as Christians are called. I mean, we want God's will be done in heaven, so on earth. But we are not doing it to gain power, right? And so I want to highlight with some of these 6 characteristics of the Western esoteric traditions is I think very subtly, again, we see the same pattern over and over. They sort of invert many of the characteristics of orthodoxy itself, Orthodox Christian theology itself. Now the correspondences, we could probably generally agree with, but again, our approach to these correspondences are for an entirely different purpose. Ours are to align God's will with our will and with this fallen world. We want to align those things so it sort of mirrors. So there is as above, so below to a degree. Now, in magic, it's about harnessing the power of the universe, that you can use these ideas of lining up the stars and the time and the colors and the words and the ritual. You do it all at the right time, and you can funnel theurgically. This term theurgy is going to be very important today in our conversation. Theurgically, you can harness the power of the stars for your own projects. Now, that is all about your will. That is a worship of oneself to a fundamental degree, and that's what most of magic is. Now, the correspondences from there, it gets into what he calls a living nature. And this is the idea that nature itself is alive. The world soul. You see this in paganism. You see this in, Hinduism. You see this in various world religions, that nature is entirely animate. We did a whole stream on the goddess and how the goddess theology also believes that nature is entirely animated. They obviously tend to use the Gaia hypothesis, the Gaian theory of all this different stuff. Well, magic tends to have these same ideas, that living nature has a sort of single soul, that it's animated, it's alive. You see this in psychedelics as well. You see it in tribal traditions, most magical traditions, all this different stuff. Now, the world soul is, again, for us, it's, as Orthodox Christians, we definitely would not believe in a world soul. Now, we souls, we are made in the image of God. We are the highest, we are the epitome of creation itself. And to a degree, the magic, they'll talk about man being the measure of all things, which is much more hermetic than how Orthodoxy would like to describe that, because that tends to lead towards the worship of man. But we certainly would not support this idea of a world soul, that, again, nature is alive in itself. It's all created. And if we're going to describe creation, we are the most animate, we are the most living dimension, aspect of creation itself. Humankind, mankind is. Now, the imagination and mediation, this is another big one, that for these magical traditions, the imagination is the meeting point between the micro and the macro. Right, so if as above, so below, if it's all about getting in harmony, these sort of multi-tiered levels of reality, where do they meet? They meet in technically the imagination. And this is very different from Orthodoxy. In Orthodox theology, we are not to root our spirituality in our emotions or our imagination, because that is how we come misled. In fact, this is a big difference between Orthodoxy and Catholicism in regards to the Ignatius prayer. St. Ignatius in the Catholic tradition, he was all about getting into these intense imaginative states, these hyper emotional states, where we would say that leads you to prelest, because the logisme, the spiritual warfare, is often in the imagination. It's the imagination one has to guard themselves from, to dive into the imagination as the source of truth, or, again, the meeting point of all reality. We would say that's going to lead you towards prelest. That's going to lead you towards some dark areas, because that is the sort of warfare, that is the sort of stage in which our spiritual warfare takes place, is in the imagination. But for the magic practitioners, that is the epicenter. That's where the action begins. And so the fourth dimension of these Western esoteric traditions is the experience of transmutation, or a sort of second birth. Now, their second birth is not like our being born again in Christ. Often we talk about a sort of second birth or being born again regarding to our relationship to Jesus. However, they mean something different. They mean, again, a second birth in regards to this larger perception of oneself. Again, a sort of worship of oneself, that you can see it in the psychedelics. It's about the dissolution of the ego, destroying your ego death. This could be considered a sort of experience of transmutation, the second birth process in these magical traditions. Okay, so again, something very different than how Orthodoxy would define that or understand it, but you see just a subtle difference. And then you have the fifth characteristics, which is one of the secondary characteristics, is the Prisca Theologia, or the practice of concordance, that these people, these practitioners of magic, saw a series of similarities across different traditions, and that they wanted to harmonize them into one practice. Again, thinking that it all stems from the single Prisca Theologia. And then they have the transmission, that all these secret societies, all these practices of magic have a transmission dimension where, again, you're initiated. Maybe it's your master, maybe it's I don't know, there's different ways you can be initiated. Initiation rituals, hazing, this type of stuff. That is the sixth characteristic of the Western esoteric traditions. And so I just wanted to put these up here because this is how the Western esoteric traditions are defined. This is the rubric. If you're a scholar and you're looking at practices in the world and you're trying to identify, do these belong to the lineage of the Western esoteric traditions, this is some of the rubric you might use. Now, again, even this is contested, obviously, as everything is in academia, but I do find it very, very useful. Okay, so with all that being said, that is all just to try to get us into then the conversation today in regards to these ancient traditions. So now we're going to read. And so much of the rest of today's stream is going to be me reading.
I thought you'd changed since Newcastle. Oh, the look on your face when I opened that portal and tossed little Astra in. Even tainted by her father, there was still so much innocence left in her. Delicious. I told you back in London that I had many names. I've been keeping tabs on you since Newcastle. John, watched you claw your way back from the edge of sanity. Watched you master the very dark arts that failed you 15 years ago. You really should thank me.
Thank you.
After all, I did inspire you to become a better man, didn't I?
A witch with a doll figurine or photograph in front of her, we've heard that they use photographs, begins the therapy. Her assistants being the devil and her medicines, the bones from the left side of a frog, the blood of a pigeon or other bird, the heart of an eel, the skin of a snake, the shroud or a blue stone, then I've done what that is. Archimandrite Meletios from the holy monastery of Grigori or Manalpos, who is a missionary Zaire. I think he took over the works of this Father Cosmas, Blessed Father Cosmas of Zaire, Apostle to Zaire. He died in a road accident, and I think this particular, he was from a monastery in Manalpos, and when he died, I think this Archimandrite Meletios took over his missionary work in Zaire, in Africa. And he says, he tells us how in 1984 he visited the town, some town there. He found there a shaman, I'll never know how to say that word, shaman, who was curing lots of people through magic. So a lot of the Africans were going there to their witch doctors, as they call them, and were getting cured. So how do we look at that? St. John Chrysostom tells us how the devil, as our enemy, doesn't want what's good for us. If he does cure us, he doesn't do so for our benefit but to harm us. Let's quote. This is now a quote from St. John Chrysostom.
This is his own words. The demons drive you out of paradise. They deprived you of that heavenly honor, and now they're going to cure your body. In other words, how can the devil do anything good when all he wants is to take your soul to hell? They have no pity on the soul, so are they going to pity the body? They showed no mercy to the pigs. They drowned in the sea. So why should they show any to your body? We read in the gospel how the boy was possessed, if I remember right, and then the demon asked permission from Christ. Don't send us away somewhere, send us into the pigs. And Christ said, go. And they went into the pigs, and then they made the pigs to go crazy and run off off the cliff into the water. And there's a whole explanation of why they wanted to go into the pigs and things like that, just to cause more trouble, because the Jews in that time, some of those Jews that were in that area were breeding pigs, which was illegal according to the law of Moses. So what happened was that when Christ came, they lost all their stock. So the demons knew that. They said, okay, we're going to have to make these people not listen to Christ. We'll go into the pigs, we'll kill all the pigs, thousands of them, so that then the Jews will get upset and scared or whatever, and upset that they lost the money, and say to Christ, go away from here, which they did. In other words, they were more interested in their money, and they were also scared that nothing else happens. So they told God himself to go away. They showed no mercy to the pigs, they drowned in the sea, so why should they show any to your body, says St. John Chrysostom. And even if with God's permission, the devil does cure you, don't think he's done you any good. Now this is very important, with God's permission. Why would God allow the devil to cure someone? That's interesting. We'll come to that. He might have helped your body, but he's certain to have harmed your immortal soul, because the devil knows only how to harm. Now, some of you might say, I don't understand that. How can God give permission to the devil to cure someone? Doesn't that mean that if people see that magician made someone better, that would make people run to that magician? Why is God allowing that person to make someone better? And the answer is, this is my parenthesis to explain that because I read it somewhere else, but I'll just put it in simple words. It's as if God is saying to the person, you want your body healed, you don't care about your soul, you've gone to these demonic people, then here, have your physical health, but know this, your soul will be bound to the devil. God allows, he himself allows the person to be cured so as to say to the person, you wanted so much, there it is. Now, we come to the next point and say, but how about the people that are seeing that? What are we doing here? Why would God allow those people to witness that? Because that means more Christians would go to them, to these supposed healers. And the answer is that yes, God wants that temptation there to test people. If they didn't make anyone better, well, why would God reward someone for not going? If they don't make anyone better, supposedly or whatever, then why would God say, congratulations to the Christians who wouldn't go? Reward comes to the Christian who is tempted and says, I can get better there. Other people got better. But then the person says, does his cross and say, no, the church forbids those type of things. I'm not going to go there. I'd rather die if it's meant to be. But we'll come to that because there's more writings Of course, St. John Chrysostom goes on, God allows the demons to cue you in order to teach you a lesson. Oh, he said it there. That is, not to have anything to do with demons even when they're curing you. That's what I should have said about the test. Then I put in little brackets there, as a test to see whether you are tempted with the fact that someone is being cured. So St. John Chrysostom did answer that, sorry. I would rather die, says St. John Chrysostom, than run to Christ's enemies for a cure. What's the good if my body is cured and my soul is harmed? What's the benefit of a little relief here on earth if it means being cast into eternal fire? What words are they? What words are they? They are not the words of some philosopher.
Thanks for watching. Pixel Talk will return.
Visit tigler.com for more art, apparel, and things yet to be revealed.